Well, good morning and welcome to summer, I think we'll call this. As you can probably tell by the fact I'm wearing a jacket, I need the windshield on my microphone. It's June here in the UK, and today we're talking all things fence-mounted solar panels. So it's been a full year. I've got all the data. I'll share it all with you today. How much energy did it produce? How much did it cost to install? And what are we going to do with it next? So before the rain starts, I think like most normal people, I'm going to head indoors because there's really only one person that really likes this weather, and he's over there on the grass enjoying himself. Okay, back in the office and leaving the dog to do whatever it was the dog was doing in the garden. I'm not going to make an assumption here that everybody is here that knows exactly what the system is, how I put it together. So we're going to go through that. I will put chapter markers in the video, so if you just want to jump straight to the numbers, then you can do. But what we'll do is we'll actually go through the system. I'll explain all the components in it, how much they cost. Then we'll get into what it generated. We'll take a look at the return on the investment. And then we'll finish up by talking about my plans for the future for this system. So with that, let's jump across to here and talk a little bit about the system and how it works. So for those that are not familiar with it, you saw a little bit when we were out in the garden there, but I have 4 200 watt, 15-year-old Sanyo panels mounted on my fence. Now you can see there in the pictures, they're not actually secured to the fence. They use what's known as a balcony mount. So they hook over the top of the fence rail there. They hang down. They are quite heavy, even with 200 watt panels on them. So there's no chance of them blowing away in the wind. And you can see there the cables run quite nice and neatly along the fence rails, making it very, very accessible if I need to move any of it. Now the clips that are holding them on there, they are of my own design. They are 3D printed. And they're designed to keep the cables nice and neat and straight. And if anybody wants to know more about those, then do reach out to me. But the system itself has now been on the fence for a full year. One of the comments that I got in a previous video was, aren't you worried that your fence might break under the weight? Well, as you can see there in that image, the fence posts themselves are actually concrete. They go into the ground by about 4 feet and are concreted in. And then the panels themselves are run into grooves that are inside those concrete posts. So they're not going anywhere short of there being a hurricane. And I think if we had a hurricane in East Anglia, then we've got bigger problems. So I'm not worried about the fence panels going anywhere. They're not cheap, flimsy, disposable fence panels like you might buy from B&Q. The solar panels themselves, as I say, are not fixed to the fence panels at all. They can just be lifted straight up and lifted off. They are quite heavy with the mount and obviously the panel put on top of them there. So this is what the system looks like. Now, I'm going to explain each part of the system as we go through. So we've just looked at the 4 panels that are on the fence, but those 4 panels are set up into 2 strings, 2 panels per string, and they're wired in parallel. Now, the reason for this, if you don't know the difference between series and parallel wiring of panels, there's plenty of great articles out there on the internet. But the reason I wired them in parallel into 2 strings was to keep the voltage down. The MPPTs on the EcoFlow inverter have a very specific range about how much voltage you can put in before you start to damage them. So I wanted to keep the voltage, I think it's under 77 volts. But by wiring them in parallel into 2 strings meant that they would conform with the requirements of the inverter. That takes us on to the EcoFlow PowerStream inverter. This is a small 800 watt inverter, so 800 watts maximum. As I say, it has 2 MPPTs, so you can connect 2 separate strings to the inverter and it can monitor those strings independently. If you've never actually seen one, I've got one over here. This is my spare. So They look a little bit like an Apple Mac Mini, if you know what a Mac Mini looks like, or certainly the older Mac Minis. On the back there, you've got 4 different ports, well, 3 ports actually, and one of them is just the Wi-Fi antenna. But you've got ports to connect your solar string to, you've got ports to connect a battery to, and you've got a port for output to the mains. It is a heavy chunk of metal. These do get quite hot because obviously you've got 2 MPPTs in here, and then you've got the inverter itself. But if you put your hand on it and you feel it's very hot, don't worry. It's worked perfectly for a year with this thing running at quite a high temperature. This case makes an excellent heatsink. So we then have the microinverter. Obviously the panels connect into that. Now the next part of the diagram is purely optional. You do not need this, but I happen to have a Delta Pro, which is the one on the left with the ports on the front, and then a Delta Pro expansion battery. These are 2 3.6 kilowatt batteries. The Delta Pro itself does have an AC inverter in it, although in this case it's not being used. They're literally just being used as batteries to the power stream. So they have a nice thick cable that connects between the power stream and the battery, and then from one battery to the second battery. That gives me 7 kilowatt hours of storage. So again, if there is excess that the system is generating, it will trickle charge those batteries as well. Now the next part of the diagram might be a little confusing because you think, okay, well, if you're charging them from solar, why does it need a plug? So I have an EcoFlow smart plug plugged into a plug socket in my garage. This allows me to grid charge those batteries overnight if I want to. Now in the summer I don't need to do this. The system will produce more than enough power, but I have my inverter set up such that it will output a continual 500 watts. Now to do this you do need batteries because you can't always guarantee that you will be getting 500 watts from the panels, given it has an 800 watt maximum. So if I'm not getting 500 watts from the panels, the batteries will top up that to continually supply 500 watts. Now the reason I do it this way, the inverter can work like every standard inverter. It can ramp up and ramp down as and when there's more demand, it can deliver more power. When there's less demand, it delivers less power. But I also have my big SolarEdge inverter, so I don't want them competing with each other to try and supply the power to the house. So I set the EcoFlow to output 500 watts from the first thing in the morning until either the sun goes down or the batteries run out of power. So generally what I will do is grid charge those batteries overnight. Now again, in the summer I don't need to do this, they are always full at the end of the day. But in the winter, it means that this system, even if I'm getting almost nothing from the panels, can continue to supply the house with 500 watts of base load all day long. So that EcoFlow plug allows me to turn on the batteries to grid charge. Now the reason I'm using an EcoFlow plug there is what you don't want to happen is you end up with a circular route. So we would be bringing power in from the grid through the EcoFlow plug into the batteries, have the batteries supply it to the inverter supply it back into the house through the connection, and that way the power would basically be going around because we'd just be losing efficiency by doing that. So what we have is an automation on the inverter that says at night time, stop supplying power to the house, so put the inverter to sleep, and then turn on the plug, which allows the batteries to charge. Then in the morning, the batteries stop charging, the plug switches off, and the inverter switches on. So there's never a situation where the inverter is supplying power from the batteries whilst the batteries are bringing in power from the grid. I hope that makes sense. But it works really, really well. Then we have our supply into the house. So the 800 watt inverter has a connection into a fused spur. That fused spur has its own breakers in the fuse box, and then that supplies power into the house. And as I say, it is a sustained 500 watts that we send into the house. Now, do we use 500 watts all of the time? No. But our base load is somewhere between 350 and about 400 watts. So in the summer, the extra 100 watts just gets exported to the grid, and we obviously get paid for that by Octopus. Now the last part you can see there is the Shelly EM50. So this is an energy monitor that lives inside the fuse box. It has a couple of CT clamps that go around both the incoming and the outgoing wires. So I can measure how much power the batteries are taking, and I can also measure how much power the system is supplying to the house. Now, the reason I use the Shelly monitors, as I've said in some of my heat pump videos, is I find the apps that come with these platforms, whether it's the EcoFlow app or whether it's the Daikin app, they are not that accurate. And I've actually done some testing around this. And generally, when I say they're not trying to deceive anybody, but they generally round up numbers into nice whole numbers. And if you start to do that over a long period of time, you can really get a big difference in the actual amounts used. So I want accurate figures. So the Shelly EM50 there allows me to monitor how much power the system is producing and sending to the house, and how much energy I'm taking from the grid at night time and putting it back into the batteries. So that gives me accurate numbers that I can actually use to model, is this system producing enough? How much money am I getting? All of that, I'm pretty confident in my numbers. Okay, so what did the system cost to build? And if you were going to build this from scratch, how much would it cost you to put it together? There are kind of two parts to this. There is what I would say is required. You can't do without any of these parts really. And there are things that you can do optionally. The optional things do cost a lot more money. But let's start with the panels. So as I say, these 4 panels were 4 of the 10 that I took off of my roof just over a year ago. I didn't want to see them go to landfill or just get recycled. They're perfectly good panels, as they've proven in the last year. They continue to generate electricity. And I didn't have other use for them. So 6 of them are still stacked around the side of my house for other projects, as I keep telling the wife, and 4 of them are hanging on my fence. So we didn't have to pay anything for those because, as I say, they came off of the roof, new panels went on. The micro inverter itself cost me £99. Now, if you look on the EcoFlow website, I've seen these as expensive as nearly £400. But if you go to the EcoFlow official EcoFlow page on PayPal or on Amazon, you can get them for £99. And it is exactly the same. You're not buying it through a third party, you're actually buying it directly from EcoFlow. So I don't know why they put it on their website for so much. Maybe they've changed that since I last looked. But £99 gets you the inverter and all the necessary cabling that you need to be able to hook that up. You then need 4 mounts to put the panels on the fence. Now, I suppose if you were doing this on a budget, you could just stand the panels up alongside the fence, but there is a possibility that they would blow down, and if these panels fall on the glass front, then they'll shatter the glass and the panel will be completely useless. So the cheapest I could find for 4 of these mounts was about £148. And again, these come as a series, all self-assembly, just a series of struts and nuts and hooks and bits and pieces, but it allows you to mount your panel securely to the fence. And then DC cabling, MC4 connectors, all the bits and pieces to actually be able to wire all this together. So again, about £99 for the inverter, about £148 for the mounts, and about another £50 for cabling that you're going to require. On the optional side, if you want to add 7 kilowatts of batteries, this is the current price for the EcoFlow Delta Pro and the Delta Pro battery. There are newer models. There is now the Delta Pro 3, which I believe is a 4 kilowatt battery. Again, a bit more expensive. These are not cheap. When you compare these to the cost per kilowatt for home batteries that are not portable, they are expensive. But I've got to say, the Delta Pro has been absolutely faultless. It has worked every single day, no faults, never had an issue with it at all in the whole year that it's been used there. And I actually owned it for a year before that, and I used it for all sorts of other projects. So again, and then the EcoFlow smart plug. EcoFlow do charge a bit of a premium for their smart plugs, which does annoy me. It works very well. It allows you to use the EcoFlow app to do automation. They are Matter compatible plugs. So if you're using Home Assistant or something like that, you can manage them through that ecosystem. The only thing that annoys me is you can only get the energy usage stats through the EcoFlow app. As a Matter plug, they should be able to report that, but they don't report it if you just plug it into Home Assistant that way. There is a way to get that data. You can use the EcoFlow plug into Home Assistant to talk to the EcoFlow cloud to be able to retrieve that data, but it's a lot more of a faff. It would be nice if the plugs just reported data, just like the Shelly plugs do. And then we've got the Shelly EM50 for energy monitoring. Again, not required because you can just take the data directly from the EcoFlow app. So let's talk about what did it produce. Now, as I say, we've run this solidly from June last year, so all June through December, and then January through to the end of May. And this is what it looked like. Now, the numbers are not huge, but bearing in mind, we've got 4 200-watt panels, and they're not exactly in what I would call the perfect orientation. A couple of them are south-facing, but as soon as the sun moves into the southwest part of the sky, they're actually shaded by trees. And the 2 that are southeast facing, once the sun goes again past sort of south, moving into southwest, then they're shaded by the end of the day. So unfortunately, I can't rejig my fence line. My neighbours might have something to say about that. So I get what I get. There's really not much I can do about it. Now I do tilt the panels up. Now one of the panels does have an EcoFlow tracker on it. We'll talk about that in a completely separate video. But the other panels, I do tilt them up by 5 degrees. I actually made a funky little adapter that I can put underneath the panel, and then I can screw it in and out. It's just a 3D printed block of plastic that lets me adjust how far the panels come out. But I keep them at about 5-degree tilt off the face of the fence. So as you can see, in January, almost nothing, not even a kilowatt hour. And then February this year, very cold, wet, miserable. And then March, April and May have been stunning months. So 37 and a third, 56 and a quarter, and then at 63 for May. And then the bars that are in green, those are obviously last year, so June, July and August. Now last summer wasn't anywhere near as good as the beginning of this year, and hopefully the rest of this year will be. So maybe we'll see another 10 to 15% on those numbers as we go through towards the end of this year. But you can see there, June, July, we had a bit of a reasonable August. And then as you get into the back part of the year, September, October, November, it drops off. And in December, the system actually didn't generate anything. It just generated enough power to keep the inverter running. So a 0 for that. So if we take all of those numbers and we add them all together, we generated 354.56 kilowatt hours. Now, obviously, compared to a home system with large panels on a roof that are all aligned correctly, that's nothing. For a full year, we generated nearly 5 times that in 1 month last month with our house system. But it is a small system. It is really designed to be hanging on the edge of a balcony in a flat or an apartment. But 354.56 kilowatt hours. I just noticed at the top there, before anybody writes in the comments, that the kilowatt hours, the case is wrong. It should be small k, capital W, small h. So please don't yell at me in the comments for that. But 354, and if we take this standard Octopus day rates, that would have been £102.68. So we made £102.68 throughout the course of the year. So the return, was it worth it? Well, if you were just building this from scratch, assuming you, like me, you could source some old cheap solar panels, these are the bits you'd have to buy. So you would obviously need the inverter, you would need the fence mounts. You probably don't need the Shelly, if I'm totally honest, but I would put it in just to give you accurate numbers. And you're obviously going to need some cabling. So if you put all that together, it would come out at about £297 to build the entire system, excluding the batteries. So we made £102 after spending £297. So the system will pay for itself in 3 years, which, when you look at the return on investment on a larger house system, that's really good. You'd be looking at somewhere between 6 and 8 years, depending on the system you install, before you got your money back with a larger system. So to get your money back inside 3 years, I think that's a pretty good return on investment, personally. So next steps. What will we do with it now? Well, it's not the prettiest. Now, I've been very fortunate. The chief financial controller has not complained recently about the look of the fence panels. But but I am looking to try and tidy it up, make it look a little neater. And there's a couple of options that are open to me. So as I say, these are old panels. They're probably not producing quite what they could. So I could upgrade to 400 watt panels. Now I couldn't do 400 watt panels because the inverter wouldn't be able to cope with that. But we might be able to do 2 to 3. We might be able to get the alignments a little bit better if we're not having 4 panels. Or another option is something called the Jackson fence panels. So these are slot-in fence panels that have the panels integrated into the fence panel itself. Now there is there are 2 issues here. One is they are quite expensive. And the second thing is you need to use I believe, and I'm waiting on Jackson to come back to me on this, I believe you need to use their fence posts because all the cabling runs inside the fence posts. Now, it's not just I can't do that because I'm not going to dig out my concrete posts. I'm not willing to do that because out here in East Anglia, we are not that far above the water table. The ground is quite wet, and previous probably 2 or 3 sets of fence panels in the last 30 years have just rotted away in the ground. Even ones that claim to be treated, wooden fence panels here just rot in the ground. So I'm not going to take out the concrete posts and put in wooden ones just to be able to have some nice looking solar panels. But I'll wait and see what Jackson say, see what they come back with, and I will let you know, because this is not the end. This is to be continued, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think it's been a worthwhile experiment? If you had to wait 3 years to get your money back, would you put up with the look of solar panels hanging on your fence? And could I be doing something different? Has anybody got any ideas that you think, hey, have you thought about trying this? I'm open to all sorts of suggestions. With that, I'm going to sign off. I hope you found this interesting. Like I say, this is not the end. This is just the end of the first year. I will be back soon with another video, and if I'm lucky, I'll see you here. Take care. Bye-bye.